There are melodies that exist not in the air, but in the blood and sea rhythms older than reason, vibrating with the promise of something just beyond the horizon. But what happens when the song is not a gift, but a snare? What happens when the most beautiful sound in the world is the last sound you will ever hear? This is a story from the sun-bleached, wine-dark waters of the ancient Greek world, a universe where the ocean is not merely water, but a living, breathing entity populated by vengeful spirits and forgotten gods. It was a time when the line between the living and the dead was as thin as a sea mist, and when sailors navigated not just by the stars, but by their terrified prayers. In this cosmos, the sea was a realm of monsters, but few were as seductive and as lethal as the ones who lived on the island of Anthomoessa. The tale belongs to Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, the man of many turns, the sacker of cities. He is a hero, but his heroism is not the brute strength of Heracles. It is the sharpness of his mind and the iron will of his heart. After the Trojan War, after 10 years of blood and siege, he tried to go home. But the god of the sea, Poseidon, turned his face against him, blighting his journey with storms and monsters until Odysseus became a wanderer, a ghost of a king, crewed by men who were slowly being whittled down to nothing. They had already survived the blind rage of the Cyclops and the witchcraft of Circe. Now, Circe gave him a warning, her voice low and serious. She spoke of the Sirens. She did not describe them as the beautiful bird women of later art, but as creatures of a terrifying allure. They sat in a meadow filled with the rotting corpses of those who had failed their test, their bones bleaching under the sun. Whoever draws near and unwarily listens to the siren's voice, Circe told him, never returns. His wife and children never see him again. The sirens sit in a green field and sing to him, their voice liquid and haunting, promising knowledge of all things, of all the sorrow that brought the Trojans to their knees and the Greeks to glory. Odysseus, the cunning tactician, devised a plan that was part madness and part genius. He ordered his men to take beeswax and knead it in their hands until it was soft and pliable, stopping up their ears completely. They would row blindly, deaf to the world. But Odysseus, proud, desperate, reckless Odysseus needed to hear them. He needed to know if he could resist. He ordered them to bind him tight to the mast of the ship, lashing his arms and his chest with rough rope, leaving him straining and helpless. He gave them a strict, terrible command. No matter how he screamed, no matter how he begged or threatened or raved, they were not to untie him. They must row harder. The ship approached the fateful island. The wind died down, leaving the water a mirror of glass. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen electricity. And then it began. It started as a whisper on the breeze, a thread of pure, crystalline sound that seemed to bypass the ears and pierce directly into the soul. It was a sound of such impossible sweetness that it made the heart ache with a longing that was almost physical pain. It was the sound of home, of peace, of the end of struggle. The sirens sang. Their voices rose in a harmony that no human choir could ever match. Come here, they sang, their voices dripping with honey and poison. Come here, Odysseus, pride of the Greeks. Stop your ship and listen to our voice. None have ever passed this way in a black ship without hearing the honey-sweet music from our lips. They delight in it and go on their way wiser, for we know all the things that happen on the vast earth. They sang of the Trojan War, not as a history, but as a revelation. They promised to reveal the secret will of the gods, the unseen movements of the cosmos. It was the ultimate temptation for a man like Odysseus, a man who valued knowledge above all else. It was the song of omniscience. Inside his chest, Odysseus' soul twisted. The sound was a hook in his gut. He strained against the ropes, the fibers cutting into his skin, his face darkening with the unbearable desire to leap into the sea. He screamed at his men. He thrashed. He ordered them to cut the ropes, his voice cracking with desperation. "Let me go. I must go to them. They know the truth. They have the answers." But the men could not hear him. They could not hear the sirens either. To them, the world was silent save for the creak of the oarlocks and the splash of the sea. They saw their captain writhing in agony, his mouth contorted in silent screams, and they rowed with terrified strength, pulling the ship forward, inch by agonizing inch, dragging their king away from his heart's desire. On the rocky shore, the sirens watched. For the first time, their spell had failed. Their dark eyes narrowed. The song rose to a fever pitch, a crescendo of heartbreaking beauty, a final, desperate lure. The water churned around the ship. The very air seemed to weep with the melody. And then, the ship rounded a headland. The wind caught the sail. The distance grew. The sound faded, leaving only the salt spray and the crying of the gulls. The sirens fell silent, defeated by the simple combination of wax and rope. They say the sirens were not merely monsters, but the daughters of the river god Achilles and the Muse, once playmates of Persephone. When Hades stole Persephone to the underworld, the sirens were given wings by Demeter to search for her, but they failed to find her. As punishment, or perhaps through the madness of grief, they transformed into the singers of Detha, seeking to lure men into the deep to replace the maiden they could not save. To the ancient Greeks, this myth was a map of the perils of the human condition. It spoke to the seductive power of the epithymia, a desire. The sirens are not just physical monsters. They are the embodiment of the things that call to us in the dark. The easy way out, the addiction, the obsession, the promise of total knowledge that blinds us to the reality of the world. They represent the idea that sometimes what we want most is what will destroy us. But there's a deeper wisdom here. Odysseus is the hero not because he is stronger than the monster, but because he knows his own weakness. He acknowledges that he cannot trust himself. He binds himself to the mast of the ship, and he trusts his community, his deafened crew, to save him from himself. It is a profound statement about the necessity of restraint and the power of collective survival over individual ego. The Song of the Sirens did not end with Odysseus. It echoed through the ages. The sirens found their way into the art of the Romans, the pottery of the Greeks, and the poetry of the medieval age, evolving into mermaids who lure sailors to their doom with the same fatal promise of love. They became symbols of temptation itself, the dangerous allure of the forbidden. The word siren today is a warning, a sound that cuts through the chaos to tell us of danger, though the warning itself is a seductive, wailing cry that demands we pay attention. We live in a world full of sirens. We hear them in the algorithms that promise us connection but leave us lonely, in the substances that promise escape but enslave us, in the ambitions that promise glory but cost us our lives. The song is always playing, but the mast remains. We still have the capacity to know our limits, to bind ourselves to the things that ground USA, our duty, our families, our own survival codia, and to let the rest of the world row on, deaf to.